My name is Michael Chen, and I learned the hard way that in corporate law, your worst enemies often sit in the corner office down the hall. After 5 years at Preston & Porter, one of Boston's most prestigious law firms, I discovered that talent and dedication mean nothing when you're up against old money and deep-rooted prejudice. I still remember my first day at the firm, fresh out of Harvard Law, clutching my leather briefcase like a shield. David Porter, the managing partner's son, had given me the grand tour, his Brooks Brothers suit and signet ring screaming old money. "Listen, Chen," he'd said, leaning against his mahogany desk. "This isn't some Silicon Valley startup. We have traditions here. Standards. Make sure you understand that." I understood perfectly. I was the first Asian American associate they'd hired in 15 years. The message was clear: don't rock the boat. So I didn't. I worked harder than anyone else, billing more hours than any other junior associate. I took the complex cases nobody wanted, the ones buried in regulatory paperwork and international tax codes. While others networked at country clubs, I spent weekends building a reputation as the firm's go-to person for impossible cases. That's how I landed the Anderson account. Anderson Technologies was a mid-sized software company on the verge of going public. Their CEO, Sarah Anderson, had specifically requested me after hearing about my work on a similar IPO case. It should have been my big break. The Anderson account is worth potentially $50 million in legal fees, David Porter had said during the partners' meeting, his voice carrying that peculiar mix of contempt and false concern he perfected over the years. "Are we sure Chen is the right fit?" The other partners shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs, but Sarah Anderson had been adamant. She wanted the associate who'd successfully handled the Zhang Technologies IPO. Me. For 6 months, I lived and breathed the Anderson case. I spotted regulatory issues others missed, restructured their intellectual property holdings for maximum protection, and crafted an IPO strategy that would maximize their market value. Sarah Anderson became not just a client but a mentor, someone who saw past my last name to recognize the skill beneath. "You remind me of myself 20 years ago," she told me one late night as we reviewed the final IPO documents. "Hungry, smart, unwilling to let others define your limits." I should have known it was all too perfect. 3 days before the IPO filing deadline, I arrived at the office to find my computer locked and security waiting at my desk. David Porter stood there, holding a manila envelope with a smile that made my blood run cold. "The Anderson files," he said, waving the envelope. "Apparently you've been making unauthorized changes. Fortunately, I caught them before any real damage was done." My mind raced. Unauthorized changes? I had documented every modification, gotten approval for each revision. "Unless the board has called an emergency meeting," David continued, clearly savoring the moment. "Ms. Anderson is already on her way." The next hour was a blur. Sitting in the boardroom, watching David Porter present evidence of my supposed incompetence. Doctored emails showing unauthorized changes to key documents. Fabricated timestamps suggesting I had been altering files after hours. Mr. Chen's reckless modifications could have exposed Anderson Technologies to serious regulatory scrutiny, David declared to the assembled partners. We had to act quickly to protect our clients' interests. I sat there, my years of hard work unraveling in minutes. The partners avoided my eyes, their silence a tacit endorsement of this character assassination. Only Sarah Anderson seemed skeptical, her sharp eyes moving between David and me. "This is quite serious," she said finally. "I'd like to review all the documentation myself. Every version, every changelog." "Of course," David replied smoothly. "We've prepared a complete audit trail." He gestured to a thick binder in front of him. That's when I saw it, a tiny detail that made everything click into place. The audit logs David was so proudly displaying. They were using the wrong document tracking system, a system the firm had replaced 3 months ago. I felt a calm settle over me, the kind of clarity that comes when you realize you've already lost everything that matters, or thought you had. "Mr. Porter," I said, standing slowly, "those are interesting logs. But perhaps we should check the current system, the one we switched to in March." David's smile flickered for just a moment. "That won't be necessary. We have all the relevant information here." "Actually," Sarah Anderson interjected, "I'd very much like to see both." "Now." "I'm afraid that's not possible," David said quickly. "The old system was corrupted during the transfer. I pulled out my phone, opening a secure cloud drive. Really? That's strange, because I have complete backups of both systems, including the original change logs that show exactly who modified what documents and when. The room fell silent. David Porter's face went from confident to concerned in the span of a heartbeat. "This is ridiculous," he sputtered. "Security, escort Mr. Chen out. He's terminated, effective immediately." I stood straightening my tie. Of course. But first, I turned to Sarah Anderson. "Ms. Anderson, I believe you'll find these interesting." I sent her a secure link to my backup files. Every original document, every legitimate change log, and I paused, looking directly at David Porter. "Security footage from the document processing room for the past week. You might want to pay special attention to the timestamps matching the unauthorized changes." "You're bluffing," David hissed. "You don't have access to that footage." I smiled, remembering the late nights I'd spent building relationships with the 8 staff, the security team, the paralegals. All the people David Porter and his fellow partners saw as beneath their notice. "Want to bet your career on that, David?" As I walked out of the boardroom, head held high, I could hear Sarah Anderson's voice, sharp with authority. "Nobody leaves this room until I see every single file." I went home that night knowing my career at Preston and Porter was over. But as I sat in my apartment watching the city lights below, I smiled. Because I knew something David Porter didn't. Something that would make tomorrow morning very, very interesting. The next morning dawned clear and cold, a perfect New England autumn day. I took my time getting ready, choosing my best suit and the silk tie my mother had given me when I graduated law school. For the big moments, he'd said, this would definitely qualify. At precisely 9:00 a.m., my phone buzzed. A text from Jenny in it. "OMG, you need to see this. Porter just tried to access the backup servers. System locked him out. He's freaking out." I smiled, remembering the preparations I'd made months ago. In law school, they teach you to always prepare for the worst-case scenario. What they don't teach you is how to recognize when that scenario is wearing a bespoke suit and sharing your office walls. 6 months earlier, when Sarah Anderson had specifically requested me for her company's IPO, I'd seen the flash of hatred in David Porter's eyes. That's when I'd started documenting everything. Every meeting, every phone call, every document modification. I'd set up redundant backup systems, gotten timestamps and digital signatures on every version of every file. But my real insurance policy, that came from an unexpected source. Linda Martinez, the head paralegal who'd worked at Preston and Porter for 30 years, had pulled me aside one day after witnessing David berate a junior associate to tears. "You're not the first, you know," she'd said quietly. "Every few years, there's a promising associate who threatens David's position. They all leave suddenly. Professional misconduct, ethical violations, client complaints, always perfectly documented, always completely false." That conversation had led to others, with paralegals who'd witnessed document tampering, with its staff who'd been ordered to lose certain backup files, with security guards who'd seen late-night visits to the document processing room. For 6 months, while I worked on the Anderson IPO, I built a parallel case. One that documented not just my work, but a decade-long pattern of sabotage and fraud. My phone buzzed again. Sarah Anderson. Conference room. Now, I took my time walking to the office, nodding to the security guard who'd helped me access the building's security footage. In the elevator, I checked my watch. The morning's financial papers would be hitting desks right about now, including the Wall Street Journal with its interesting piece about irregularities in several high-profile IPOs handled by Preston and Porter. The conference room was packed when I arrived. Partners, associates, and, most interestingly, several members of the firm's ethics committee. David Porter sat at the head of the table, his usual smirk replaced by something closer to panic. "Mr. Chen," Sarah Anderson said, rising from her seat. "Thank you for joining us. We've been reviewing your documentation." I took a seat, noticing the thick folders in front of each person. Copies of my evidence. Happy to help clarify anything. "Clarify?" David Porter's voice cracked. "This is obviously a fabrication. A disgruntled employee's attempt at revenge." Sarah Anderson held up a hand. "Mr. Porter, I suggest you let your lawyer do the talking." His lawyer? I looked more carefully around the room, noticing several unfamiliar faces with legal pads. This wasn't just a meeting. This was a deposition. Mr. Chen, a gray-haired man I recognized as the head of the ethics committee, began. These records suggest a pattern of systematic document manipulation dating back several years. Can you walk us through how you discovered this? For the next 2 hours, I laid out my case. The technical evidence was damning enough: access logs, security footage, digital signatures that proved tampering. But it was the human testimony that proved devastating. Linda Martinez described years of watching promising careers destroyed. Its staff detailed specific instances of being ordered to alter or delete records. Former clients, contacted by Sarah Anderson's team, came forward with stories of mysterious errors in their files that had cost them millions. Throughout it all, David Porter's face grew increasingly pale. When the Wall Street Journal article was mentioned, the one detailing suspicious patterns in IPO filings handled by him, he actually seemed to stop breathing for a moment. "This is absurd," he finally exploded. "You can't possibly believe this associate over me. I'm a partner. My father founded this firm." "Yes," Sarah Anderson said coldly, "and I'm sure he'll be fascinated to read the SEC's preliminary report on your handling of the last 3 IPOs you managed. The ones where mysterious errors forced the clients to retain additional legal services. Services that, coincidentally, earned you substantial bonuses." The room fell silent. David Porter looked around wildly but found no allies. The other partners were too busy calculating their own liability exposure. "Mr. Chen," Sarah Anderson continued, turning to me, "Anderson Technologies would like to retain your services directly. We're establishing an in-house legal team to handle our IPO, and we need someone with both technical expertise and ethical clarity." I felt a moment of genuine surprise. This was more than revenge. This was vindication. "Of course," she added with a slight smile, "we'll need you to assist with the investigations into Preston and Porter's previous IPO filings first. The SEC is particularly interested in your documentation methods." David Porter stood up so quickly his chair toppled backward. "You can't do this. My father has already been briefed," the ethics committee had cut in. "He's on his way back from Palm Beach now. I suggest you use the time to clean out your office." The next few hours were a blur of statements, signatures, and handshakes. By evening, David Porter's name was being removed from the letterhead, and I had a new business card with General Counsel Anderson Technologies printed under my name. As I packed up my office, Linda Martinez stopped by. "You did it differently than the others," she said. "They tried to fight him directly. You built a case." I nodded, carefully wrapping the photo of my parents at my law school graduation. My father taught me that the best way to defeat injustice is to expose it to light, thoroughly, methodically, and irrefutably. "And now, will you help with the investigation?" I thought about all the careers David Porter had destroyed, all the lives he'd impacted with his prejudice and corruption. "Yes," I said firmly. "Every last detail." Epilogue. 1 year later, I sat in my new office at Anderson Technologies, watching the sun set over the Boston skyline. The SEC investigation into Preston and Porter had uncovered decades of manipulation, leading to a complete restructuring of the firm. Several partners had lost their licenses. David Porter was facing criminal charges. Sarah Anderson had become more than a boss. She was a mentor, showing me how to navigate corporate leadership with integrity. Under our guidance, Anderson Technologies' IPO had been a remarkable success, and we were now expanding globally. On my desk sat a framed copy of the Wall Street Journal article that had helped bring down David Porter. Next to it was a newer article highlighting Anderson Technologies' innovative approach to corporate legal compliance, with my name prominently featured. My phone buzzed. A message from my father. "Saw your latest case made the news. Remember what I always say." I smiled, completing the thought. Success isn't about destroying your enemies. It's about building something so strong they can't ignore it. Looking out over the city, I thought about all the other David Porters out there, all the promising careers stifled by prejudice and privilege. My new position at Anderson Technologies gave me the platform to do something about it. We'd established a mentorship program for minority law students, and I regularly spoke at law schools about ethical corporate practice. The old guard was changing, not through confrontation, but through excellence too obvious to deny. David Porter had tried to end my career, but he'd only succeeded in launching it in a new direction. As I gathered my things to head home, I passed the framed mission statement in our legal department's lobby. The last line, added at my suggestion, read, "Justice prevails not through force, but through unwavering commitment to truth." David Porter had never understood that. He thought power came from manipulation and fear, but real power, lasting power, comes from building something meaningful, something that stands up to scrutiny because its foundation is solid. My phone buzzed again. Linda Martinez, letting me know another Preston and Porter alumnus had come forward with evidence. Tomorrow would bring more depositions, more documentation, more truth coming to light. But tonight, I had dinner plans with Sarah Anderson and some promising law students. After all, the best revenge isn't just exposing what's wrong. It's building something better in its place.